Former Trump White House advisor Steve Bannon was sentenced to 4 months in jail for defying a subpoena from the House probe of the January 6 Capitol riot. National correspondent Logan Raddick has the latest details. Logan.
Well, Katrina, Steve Bannon could actually be the first person to go to jail for contempt of Congress since all the way back in 1948. That was when the Hollywood 10 from Hollywood, a bunch of movie stars and writers, they were sentenced to prison for contempt of Congress during the HUAC hearings. But this is a very unprecedented situation for Steve Bannon. Judge Carl Nichols sentenced him to 4 months in jail with a $6,500 fine, and that is actually a shorter sentence than what the Justice Department wanted. They wanted him sentenced to 6 years in jail. Now, Judge Nichols said a number of things during sentencing, including the following. He said Mr. Bannon had not provided a single document. He had not provided any testimony on any topic, adding, quote, some of the information sought by the subpoena is information under which no conceivable claim of executive privilege could have been made. But the judge did acknowledge some separation of power issues relevant to Bannon's defense that have not been rectified by the court, saying, quote, Bannon did not completely ignore the subpoena or fail to engage with the committee at all. But the judge also says that Bannon did appear to follow legal advice from his attorneys. Now, after the sentencing, Steve Bannon was defiant, saying he will appeal it. Here he is after the hearing.
On November 8th, the American people will raise judgment, and we will groom. The Biden administration ends on the 8th evening of the 8th of November. And some other thing is that the Department of Justice, Merrick Garland, will end up being the first attorney general that's brought up on charges of impeachment, and he will be removed from office. Thank you very much.
Now, Bannon says that he has a bulletproof appeal process for this decision if that is allowed to go about, but he would have to voluntarily bring himself to prison by November 15th if that appeal doesn't go through. So this is unprecedented again, because it would be the first person to go to jail for contempt of Congress since 1948. But there have been numerous officials since 1975 who've been held in contempt of Congress, including former Attorney General Eric Holder. That is something that Bannon and his legal team have pointed out, that many people have been held in contempt of Congress and haven't gone to jail. So he's trying to fight that 4-month sentence that was given down by the Trump-appointed Judge Nichols today. Back to you.
All right, Logan, thank you. Joining us now to discuss, distinguished university professor at Touro University, Thane Rosenbaum. Thane, a lot going on today. I don't want to leave out the fact that the president had, the former president, had a subpoena issued to him. What are your thoughts right now?
Well, remember, Bannon is claiming executive privilege. So the question is, did it apply to him when he was no longer officially working for the president? Right? That's one of the things the court said. Executive privilege really applies to the president. You know why? He's the executive. It's the privilege that belongs to him. So clearly, you know, that's what he would be arguing, and he should be arguing that. And remember, the committee issued subpoenas to 4 of Trump's advisors. Meadows and Scavino were not charged at all. And that's an argument that I'm sure Bannon will make on appeal. Wait a minute, why did you pick me and not those guys? Why those guys? Now, I think the prosecution is going to say, because those guys at least spoke to us. They showed up to court. This is an example of where if you really show contempt, true contempt, this is an example where the legal system goes nuts. And I think that's one of the reasons why you saw a more extreme penalty, because not only that, he went on his podcast and castigated the committee and the criminal contempt indictment. So the legal system takes the position, look, this is a really bad example of contempt, so we're going to throw the book at you. But that's not what Meadows did. That's not what Scavino did. Navarro's coming up for trial next month. And by the way, this might be a message that was sent to the president, because as you pointed out in your last block, the president is also now receiving a subpoena. So notice the timing, right? As if a message to Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump, hey, you know what? We throw the book at people for this. You know, it may only be a misdemeanor. Let's be serious. Contempt of Congress is just a misdemeanor. So you could take the point, it's just a misdemeanor, but if you flaunt us, if you ignore us, if you reject us, if you show contempt and not show up don't respond to us in any meaningful way, go look at your friend Steve Bannon. He's sitting in jail.
Yeah, Thane, give us a little bit of your expert thoughts about how that could play out if the president does say, okay, I'm going to ignore this subpoena based on executive privilege. Then what?
Well, Katrina, remember, the Congressional Investigation Committee are not prosecutors. They're Congress people. They don't have any prosecutorial authority. They have to ask the Justice Department, would you please bring an indictment against the President of the United States for contempt of Congress? Not for contempt of court, contempt of Congress. Guess what, Katrina? Congress is already, the Justice Department is already engaged in its own investigation on January 6th, and they're thinking of bringing their own prosecution. So if you're Merrick Garland, you're going, wait a minute, we're going to bring two of them? We're going to bring one for Congress? Because he's going to ignore Congress, and he's going to ignore us. He's not going to show up for us or for Congress. So I would be, if I was Garland, the Attorney General, I'd be very strategic. Why are we carrying the bags of the committee? We've got our own problems. We may actually indict this president and actually subpoena him, and he's going to ignore us. There's no reason to test it out first with the congressional contempt if there's going to be the contempt of court. So I don't know. I mean, again, I'll go back to the point I said at the beginning. The strongest defense is executive privilege. And guess what? The president is the executive. And he's going to say, now, if my people and I are sitting in my office and we're talking about an election that I think did not go right, I'm allowed to talk to them openly and honestly. And you can't make me say what I said to them, and you can't force them to reveal what they said to me in advising.
Well, one more question before we go, Thane. It's November 14th that the former president is supposed to show up. It's supposed to be a deposition. I don't think it's the kind of thing where it's in Congress on TV. It's also possibly by video conference, this according to the subpoena. How hard would it be for him to say, you know, I need a little more time for this and run the clock out? It'll be after the election then anyway. It's quite possible he's going to say, you guys aren't even in charge anymore. What's his likely response and how will it work?
Bob, that's a really great point. This whole thing expires at the end of the term, right? The committee would have to sort of reconvene with different people and reissue the subpoena and take advantage of saying, we now want you in February of 14. So he's saying, look, I'm not showing up because I'm not ready to testify, right? This happens all the time. You seek extensions in depositions. With the president of the United States, the former president, again, you have so many more defenses available to you that were not available to Bannon. So you can see how the president's lawyers would say, you know, he's just not ready. We need more time. And remember, in the Attorney General's civil case that was brought here in New York, the president's deposition, right? He essentially just refused to answer all the questions under the Fifth Amendment. So, like, not only does he not have to, even if he did show up, even if he didn't show complete contempt, he could exercise his right under the Fifth Amendment to not answer any questions. Why? Because both I have a right not to incriminate myself, and I own an executive privilege about every question you're asking me.
Yeah. Thane, I think we're going to be talking about this again between now and then. Thank you so much.
Anytime for you both.